So we'll then move on to item 9 on the agenda, again brought forward stop and search, and just again a little bit of context before I ask you to comment on this. You know, this is a report that I've asked for on a regular basis. I think we last reviewed this in January 2017, and of course we as an office continue to work with various scrutiny groups around stop and search, and I've also met with the HMIC regarding his oversight of stop and search as well. Obviously I'm aware that we introduced the ride-along scheme, the best use of stop and search, some time ago now, and I know that's recently been audited, and you know, I think it is something that always creates interest, but certainly from the report you're going to comment on, there has been some changes which I'm sure you're going to sort of highlight now.
So again, just by way of introduction, we report on a very regular basis to you about where we are with stop and search, because we recognise that this is a particularly sensitive issue for our communities. We do try and explain what we're doing, what the power actually involves, trying to ensure that our officers are well trained and know what a good interaction looks like, bearing in mind that this is quite an intrusive power that police officers and so on have. The difficulty, I think, at the moment is that the Home Office's guidance around best use of stop and search really does focus on numbers and reductions of the use of the power at a time when we are actually seeing violent crime statistics rising within West Yorkshire and indeed across the country. And of course, one of the main uses of this particular power is as a preventative measure, a preventative tool to try and encourage people not to carry weapons, not to carry items that could be used in the commission of offending or criminality, and indeed items that might in fact be prohibited to carry at all. So on the one hand, we've seen some successes in that officers are using this power far, far more thoughtfully. On the other, I do have a nervousness that actually less isn't necessarily better. So I think I just put that context there, and I say that because for the last few reports we've really emphasised to you, Commissioner, that we use this power sensibly and appropriately and try to be as intelligence-led as we can. But we've also got a new generation of officers now joining us who need to understand how to use this power effectively and appropriately. And so I am going to be encouraging officers to use the powers appropriately and effectively. So we might just see over the next few reports some variations within the figures. And I'm just setting that context so that everybody, including members of the community, understand that officers have got to be able to use this power and therefore need to train and practice it.
Yeah.
Catherine.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there is, you know, it's a national picture, the reductions in stop and search. It's certainly not in any way restricted to West Yorkshire or even this region, and there are lots of different reasons for that. I think one of the things that I would pick out to build on what the Chief has already said from the report is that we have seen an increase, a steady increase in our percentage of positive outcomes from stop and search, which I think does show that people, as the Chief says, are using it thoughtfully and in a targeted way, which is what we want people to do. But again, I concur with the fact that we do need to have the confidence to use it appropriately, but as a preventative tool, especially in terms of violence in particular areas. You picked up on the best use of stop and search, and just to pick out a couple of highlights in terms of that, there are 3 triggers which are explained within the pack, so I won't go into those in any more detail. But the ride-along scheme has been used 44 times up until now. I think from the data in the pack it shows that Bradford and Calderdale had some work to do in terms of bringing up their numbers and opening it up to people, but I can report that Bradford have 15 people in application stage at the minute for the ride-along scheme, and Calderdale are a little bit further on and have 3 at the vetting stage, so there is progress across all of those areas, and I think, you know, some really great hot debrief feedback that we get from those ride-along schemes, so important to keep pushing the districts to do that. On an ongoing basis then, as the Chief alluded to, there's the national training package which has been rolled out, and we continue to dip sample and evaluate and understand what the changes in the focus of that training might do in terms of people feeling confident or not to do stop searches and the sensitivities around that. We're developing a mobile app so that officers can update their stop and search, which makes it better for us to be able to understand when a stop search is being done and what grounds have been used. At the moment we do that via the district control rooms, so people being able to do that themselves on handheld will improve the accuracy of the data, which I think will be good. We're on with our national recommendations from the MPCC. All 34 of those are green, so we're pressing on with those. And the 200 that it speaks about in the report in terms of dip sample, we've fed a number of issues back nationally in terms of developing some of that work, but HMIC in the last legitimacy report, you'll note, suggested that they felt that we were good in terms of how we utilise that power.
No, thank you, and I absolutely understand the context of yes, it's been a falling picture in the numbers of stop and searches here and nationally, but at a time when we've seen these significant incidents, the other side of that coin is, you know, clearly using it where it is appropriate to try and prevent major crimes from being committed. So I think there's perhaps been a slight change in the wider picture, shall we say, and government may well need to revisit the current sort of criteria around what they call best use of stop and search. But anyway, that's just a comment, but moving on in terms of a few questions. So again, Catherine, you did make the comment around the number of positive outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, 12% of the stop searches led to an arrest, but 19%, according to the report, led to a positive outcome. Could you just explain what is meant by a positive outcome which doesn't result in an arrest?
Yeah, so these are things like cautions, community resolutions, directions to leave, fixed penalty notices, that kind of thing. So that'll be the additional 7% on top of the 12 that we arrest for.
Okay, so it's other outcomes deemed as
other criminal
positive.
justice outcomes.
Yeah. In paragraph 8 of the report, it talks about strip searches, and again, notice that there's been a reduction since the last report, 58 down to 41, which I think in those circumstances is probably good news, but they do seem to be more weighted towards the BME community. Do you have any more information about that particular aspect of those?
Yeah, I suppose picking up on the first bit around 58 down to 41, it's difficult really to say whether that's good news or not, because actually more might be good news if we're getting the right people and we're doing it appropriately. So it's a really difficult area, I think, to unpick a lot of this, and can change quite frequently depending on what's happening kind of in our communities. In terms of the strip searches, you are more likely to be strip searched if you are stopped and the powers are exercised under Section 23 of the Drugs Misuse Act, as opposed to Section 1 where we're stopping and we're looking for weapons and things like that, because clearly, without going into a lot of detail, it is easier to conceal drugs, perhaps we need strip searches more than it is for weapons. And there are a higher number of our BME populations who are stopped and searched under the misuse of drugs power than if you take the whole of stop and search generally. So I think that accounts for those extra numbers in terms of our BME population, if you like. And part of that, and I've asked the questions around, and we do talk about this very often in local accountability meetings, is about how can we be sure that what we're doing is intelligence-led, because that's what we want to be sure about, so that we are confident to be able to say to communities, yes, there might be a disproportionate number of our BME communities that are being stopped under a certain power, but that is because we are being given intelligence. And some of that intelligence comes from our police officers, some of it will come from partners, and some of it will come from other places in the community or Crime Stoppers. And so it's about keeping on top of and looking on a regular basis to make sure that there's no obvious biases within that intelligence. And then we work on what intelligence we've got, and obviously we're intelligence-led in the way that we use the power.
Okay. I think the final point, you've probably already touched on it, it's the audit of the ride-alongs and how you're addressing that really in terms of the areas where improvements need to be made.
Yeah, so there is a consistent way of approaching this now across all the districts, and there are points of contact within those districts that are linked into to encourage people. And as I've already pointed out, the areas that needed a bit of a friendly push in the right direction have been given that, and we've got people in the pipeline now ready to do the ride-along, which clearly we'll continue to do and receive the feedback from that and see whether we need to make any amendments to the way we do things.
Yeah, because we've got some, decent numbers in the other districts, and clearly this is something that's, a ride along is there as a sort of a monitoring type role, but clearly it can't be predetermined on stops that may or may not be made. It's a random encounter, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but I mean, linked to the wider community engagement strategy, whether or not a stop is done when that ride along's happening, it's an opportunity for a member of the community to ride alongside, a member of a police officer or police staff, to see how we do things, how we engage, what kind of demands we have. So actually, in terms of trying to build on one strand of community engagement, is a really good way of doing it. And one of the things I think, especially within independent advisory groups, stop and search is very often something which they are very keen to talk to us about, be a critical friend, hold us to account about in some respects. And so I'd expect that the IAGs would be kind of really keyed into that ride along. So we'll keep pushing it as much as we can.
Yeah, and I think the British Transport Police is a very, very good YouTube video of what a positive stop and search encounter should look like. And I think even if we're not able to because of circumstances, the combination of factors isn't right where one actually takes place on that particular day, the officer can still talk through with the individual what they would expect it to look like, and perhaps point them to that YouTube clip and say, if it had happened, this is what we would have done, this is what we would have been saying, this is what we've been talking about, to again build that confidence. Yeah,
and as you say, it's a good engagement opportunity just to give them an insight into the things that have to be considered on that scheme. So well, thank you for that report.